Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our conversations now specifically as it relates to our big five, as we call it in room 303. Now I'm hopeful that you have already been exposed to our introductory set of comments and as well our treatment of our big five. Number one, epistemology, what you can know. Our quest, of course, the fallibilist position. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. And then to number two, ontology, the study of being, and that idea that you're actually maybe more than just a body. You may actually be even more than a body and a mind. You may actually be a body, mind, and whatever you want to call it. Soul, consciousness, spirit, whatever you want to call that. And then we as well conversed a little bit with our big five, number three, which is that analysis of the individual mind, or psyche, psychology. Now we turn to the second of the second pairing. That is to say, our big five, number four, sociology. And of course you can hear it right there even in the word itself, of or related to not just the individual, but the group of individuals. Now, these disciplines of psychology and sociology go all the way back, for sure, to Plato and to his dialogues. But by the 20th century, they start to gain traction as disciplines unto themselves. And it was noted by any number of theorists and thinkers. Of course, we've been mentioning Arthur Miller and his classic Crucible, that human beings are kind of strange in this regards. They'll often behave differently individually than they will behave in a group of people. So, for example, if somebody was alone and started jumping up and down and screaming, we might say about them that they are deeply upset and maybe even we should try to protect them from themselves. But if you put a few thousand people around them in a ball stadium and a goal gets scored or a basket gets made or a touchdown happens or an interception happens, all of a sudden it's totally acceptable to behave in a certain kind of crazy kind of fantastic type way. Why? Because there seems to be a difference at times between individual complexions and group complexions. Now it's going to be the great theorist John Stuart Mill who points out in his classic On Liberty that there is an interesting tension politically between the will of the individual versus the will of the group. And when those two collide, it is fascinating to kind of watch what happens. Of course, in our analysis of literary texts, we'll play the same game. Now we mentioned already that Darwin, Marx, and Freud had a lot to say about psychology, but they also had a lot to say about this question of sociology, the motivations of the group. Groups can have, in some ways, we would argue this way, they can have almost like a heartthrob of their own. They can have their own separate motivations. And we're very interested in the ways in which, quote-unquote, groupthink can happen within a text. I mean, think about, again, some of the classics that we have studied. Think about Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the play. So when mobs begin to behave in certain ways, they can become very quickly uncontrollable. Whereas as individuals, they themselves would have a much different understanding. Think about Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, a classic exemplar. These people are so enraged that they storm the Bastille, and Dickens makes it a point to say that they are destroying the very neighborhood where they live. And of course, probably no real opportunity for them to rebuild that neighborhood. They do not care because they have lost that capacity to be able to think as an individual. Now all of a sudden, they are engaged in groupthink. And we're going to see this often the case. Of course, a classic exemplar of this will be Golding's Lord of Flies. Think about the way we analyze what's going on there from its psychological, sociological dimensions. Jack is brilliant at utilizing, manipulating fears, anxieties to keep the younger boys in their place. If you want to teach a lesson, drop a rock on, of course, poor Piggy's head. That will teach the lesson. Don't disagree with Jack. He has power. Of course, at the conclusion of that text, and it's a dark one, as we have said in our lecture at LearnStrong.net, at the conclusion of that text, the idea is simply, let's get rid of Ralph. He is the last person on our island that's causing Jack any problems. Let's get rid of him by burning up the island, which of course is counterintuitive if you'll think about it, because where was somebody to stand up and say, wait a minute, if we burn the island down, what are we going to have for food source once there's nothing on the island preserved to eat? That's, of course, the environmentally conscious reading of Lord of Flies. Of course, Ralph, it does work, by the way, right? Ralph is about to get caught. And what is it that he runs right into? Well, Golding could put anybody there to rescue those boys. No, it's a Marine who is, of course, out there in the waters playing war games. War games? What are war games? Oh, it's practicing, of course, dropping rocks on your enemies' heads. See, because there's this assumption in Lord of Flies that the problem on the island is that there's no adults there. If we only had an authority figure there, an adult, we wouldn't have all of this people killing each other and taking pigs and sticking heads on sticks and all of that stuff. None of that would be happening. And yet the novel will end suggesting sociologically the human condition seems to at times be almost destined to some kind of mutually assured destruction. Mad. And to that degree, Golding was deeply concerned about the possibility of nuclear weapons leading to this kind of annihilation of the species, and for that, he writes his classic. Of course, we've been considering Arthur Miller's Crucible as well, a text that we love. Why? Because it shows us this tension between the individual and the society, or sociology versus psychology. Of course, there's a simple question. Why doesn't John Proctor just step up and say, right, look, all of this is happening because I slept with Abigail Williams and she's jealous and she wants my wife gone. Of course, he doesn't do that because of his reputation, which ironically is going to be the very reason that ultimately he won't sign that document at the end and make a false confession, and he will allow himself to actually be soap on a rope. Right? It's fascinating that there is this tension for John Proctor. We will study this text, noticing, of course, how hysteria, mass hysteria, can happen. Of course, there's going to be a pivotal moment in the play where Mary Warren is challenged to try to pretend that she is having some kind of psychic event, and she can't do it. And of course, the reason she can't do it is because that psychic event is actually a sociological event. That is to say, when all of the girls are engaging in this kind of group, pretend activity, right? All of a sudden, they do actually grow icy cold. They do actually seem to be possessed in some bizarre way. And of course, once Mary Warren can't do this, then all of a sudden everything goes sideways, and of course we have John Proctor running down, of course, out of the building. In the film version of the Daniel Day-Lewis film version that we analyzed, it's there in the water, where he screams as his final moment there, God is dead, quoting the fourth of, if you will, the great influential thinkers of the 20th century. If Darwin is one and Marx is one and Freud is one, certainly Nietzsche is the other one. The Madman passage, we've talked about it at learnstrong.net, where God is dead and we have killed him. But when he screams God is dead, what exactly is he saying? Well, many have read this as not so much a theological observation as a sociological observation. In other words, Salem is ruined. We have come to a point where hysteria has taken over, and now there is no epistemological certainty anymore that is healthy. And ontologically, we're ready to take away the value of a human life over claims that are clearly spurious. And psychologically and sociologically, there's such tremendous fear and anxiety. And, of course, people like Danforth have to be right. Hale recognizes it, but there's nothing he can do about it. Notice then the brilliance of the tension, which leads us finally to the last of our big five. The question of suffering, pain. Why must tragedies end with such pain? Why must there be such pain in life itself? That is the question of theodicy, and that's what we will deal with next. Thank you.